Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another fun day of learning. My name is Mr. Zach, and I'm a literacy coach with the Mississippi Department of Education, and I'm going to be your teacher for today's lesson. Today, we're going to continue to learn all about the writing process. And if you have them around, go ahead and grab a paper and a pencil so that you can work with me later on in the lesson when we make our own story map. In the last lesson, we learned that writers of our favorite stories, movies, books, and shows, they all use a process when they write a story or narrative. By using this process, writers can create wonderful stories with fantastic places, interesting characters, and they make us want to keep reading, watching, or listening. When we know this process, that can help us to make wonderful stories too, just like the ones that we read in our books. We also learned a new word, narrative. A narrative tells or retells events of a story in order. It includes details about what happened in the story. A narrative includes the characters, who, the setting, where, and the plot, what happens in the story in the order that it happened. Today, we're going to practice planning a narrative using the events from the story King Log and King Crane. But before we begin today's lesson, let's review what we learned about the writing process in our last lesson so that you'll be all caught up and ready to learn. We're going to be looking at this chart all throughout our writing lessons. The title of this chart is The Writing Process. Say the writing process with me. Ready? Go. The writing process. Great job. We're going to use this chart whenever we have writing lessons. So let's review it to make sure we remember what we learned last time. Remember, when a writer is writing, the first step that I just pointed to, do you remember what that step is called? Great. That's where writers make a plan. And just like the kid in that picture there, that's where they sit and we think and they plan to think of what the characters are going to do, what is the setting going to be, what are the things that are going to happen in the story, and that's called. And when we do that, we call that brainstorming. Now, our next step, remember, there is a notebook with a pencil. That's right, because the next step is when we draft, is when we take our ideas from the planning stage and we put them on paper in complete sentences. Basically, we go ahead and write our story, but we know we're going to have to go back later and do some things to it. Now, the last step of the writing process, and you can see I just pointed to what the word edit, right? Because next to edit, we have a notebook and an eraser. Because when we edit, that's when we go back, we look over our draft, and we want to make sure that we correct any mistakes if there are spelling or punctuation or capitalization. Or editing is also a good time to go back, reread what we wrote, and see if we can use any better words to make things sound the way we want them to sound. Today we're going to work mostly with the planning part, but before we do, let's review those three parts one more time. Ready? The name of the process is the writing process. Great job. Our first step, right, it's where we make a plan. We brainstorm and we come up with ideas that are going to go in our narrative. The next step, great job, it's a draft. When we write a draft, we take all the ideas from our plan and we put them on paper in complete sentences. Basically, we're writing our story, but we know that we're going to have to come back to that later on because there might be some things that we want to fix. And the last step is, I heard you say it. That's right. That's where we edit our draft. When we edit our draft, just like the notebook with the eraser, editing is when we go back and we can correct mistakes we've made. Maybe we made spelling, punctuation, or capitalization errors. Or sometimes we can go back to our writing and use better words or other words to express our ideas better. So when we edit, we go back and we make our writing look and sound better. And like we said, today we're going to continue working with the planning process. Now, in our last lesson, we also learned about this story map, because we've been learning about our terms characters, setting, and plot. So we're going to use these same stories today as we think about retelling a story. So let's review our story map in the parts one more time to make sure that we remember what we put in each one of these parts. The first section at the top says the name of the tale. Now remember, this is where we're going to write the name of the tale or the story. Tale is just another name for story. So the title or the name is where we're going to write in this box. The next two sections, who and where, here we should fill in information about the characters and the setting of the tale, and we'll put that in these two boxes. And remember, it's always best to use words right from the tale or story to describe the characters and setting as much as we can, because that helps us make sure that we're spelling correctly. Next on the story map, the what, is where we write the plot. And the plot is broken into three sections. Here we should retell what happened in the tale from beginning to middle to end. This story map even gives us transition words. Once there were for the beginning, next in the tale for middle, and at the end of the tale for the end. And for now, we're just going to focus on these three major events to retell the plot of the tale: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And today, just like last time, we're going to use this story map to retell the events, but we're going to use a different story today. We're going to use one from our decodable reader, King Log and King Crane. I love this story, and I hope you do too. But before we read it, let's make sure that we understand some of the vocabulary words that we're about to hear. The first word is fable. The story the tale that we're going to read today is a fable. And a fable is a made-up short story. But there's more to a fable than that. The characters in many fables are often animals, and the animals can think and talk just like people. And another thing fables do is they try to teach us a lesson. This picture is from an old fable called The Tortoise and the Hare. And if you think about what we just learned about fables, look at that hare or rabbit. Hare and rabbits, they're kind of the same animal. For now, it'll work. But what is that rabbit doing? Pointing and laughing at the tortoise, because he thinks the tortoise is too slow to beat him in a race. I'm gonna let you know a spoiler alert, though. The tortoise does win the race in the end, and the lesson that he learns is to never give up and to keep on trying. But just think about a fable has animals, and many times they can talk and act just like people, just like that rabbit is doing right there. Because rabbits in the real world, in the wild, they can't do those. They don't act like people like that. But in fables, they do. Our next word is crane. A crane is a big bird that lives around the water. They love to eat fish, frogs, and bugs. Our next word, tame. Tame means not wild or calm. We usually use the word tame to describe animals. Animals can be either tame or wild. Tame means they're calm. You can go up to them without worrying about getting hurt, as opposed to wild, which is definitely something that you're not going to want to go up to. Let's look at these pictures right here. All right, we have two cute puppies, right? So let's think about the word tame. Are those puppies, would you be scared to go up and pet those puppies? Most of us probably wouldn't, because we know that those puppies are going to be tame. If I go up to pet those puppies or to interact or to mess with them in any way, they're going to be fine with that, because puppies and dogs are used to being around people. They're what we call tame, because they're used to being around people and people like to, and they like to be around people. Now, let's look at another picture. All right. Now, when we think about those tame puppies over there, now we're looking at another animal, and this is it's a lion, but I want you to pay attention to the way it looks. That is definitely not an animal that I'm going to go up and try to make friends with, right? Absolutely not. That's because it's a wild animal. Remember, wild animals, they're not around people, they don't know people, so you don't go up to them because they could get scared and try to hurt you. So just remember, tame means calm or gentle, like a puppy or kitten, and wild means it could hurt you, like a bear or like a wolf or like a lion. But also remember, guys, no matter what, if you don't know an animal, even if you think it's tame, you should never go up to it anyway. All right, we're going to start our selection now that we have our words that we need to know. And remember, after we read our story today, you guys are going to help me fill in a story map with our title, we have our characters, we have our setting, and our plot. So listen carefully so that you can help us fill those things in at the end of the story. King Log and King Crane. Once the frog said, "We wish we had a king. We need a king. We must have a king." Ribbit, ribbit. The frogs spoke to the gods. They said, "We ask you, the gods, to send us a king." And look at this picture here, because we already know. We have who is in the story. We already know we have some characters. And in this picture, we can see them. Who? Some of our characters are the frogs. But if you look up in the clouds at those, looks like they're darkened figures in the clouds, those are the gods. Because many times when we refer to them in these folk tales, the gods are not exactly where this is taking place. They're always kind of watching from above, right? And they're usually thinking of ways to either help or trick the people that are below them, that are asking for things. So when we think about our characters right now, we have our frogs, and you can see up in the clouds, you have your gods that they're talking to. The gods, as you notice, aren't necessarily with the frogs in the pond. They're always kind of up above watching and making things happen. Another thing I want to draw your attention to as well is we can see some grass too. And we know that the frogs, they probably live, close to a pond that has those grasses, and we'll see that as we keep reading. "The frogs are fools," said the gods. "As a joke, let us send them a big log to be their king." The gods got a big log and let it drop. The log fell into the pond and made a big splash. The frogs were scared of the log. They said, "King Log is strong. We must hide from him in the grass." And here we can see the event from the story. There are our gods again. Notice that they're still up in the clouds, even though we can kind of see them a little bit better. They're not down there with the frogs. They're up above, making things happen. And in this picture, just like we just read, they're dropping that log into the pond. And as we just read also, what did the frogs do when that log hit the pond? It made a loud splash, so that scares the frogs. The frogs are running off into the grass. So I would describe the frogs maybe as scared or shy, right? Because as soon as the gods give them their king that they asked for, they're running off because they're scared. As time went by, the frogs came to see that King Log was tame. And remember what we learned about tame. That means he's pretty gentle, right? He didn't bite. He didn't run. He just sat there. "King Log is not a strong king," said one frog. "I wish we had a strong king." I do too. We must have a strong king. The frogs spoke to the gods. They said, we ask you, the gods, send us a strong king and send him soon. And here we go again. Just like before, the frogs asked for a king and the gods sent the king. The frogs are asking another time. We need another king. They weren't happy with our last king. Remember when the log splashed in the water, they thought that it was very scary, but then they realized it was Tame, so they asked for another king. This time, the gods sent a crane to be king of Frogland. King Crane was not like King Log. He did not just sit there. He ran fast on his long legs and he ate lots of frogs. Here you can see the crane, you know, and that's what cranes do. They eat. They got to eat, and they like to eat frogs. So that's what that crane's doing. He's probably hungry, right? The frogs were sad. King Crane is a bad king, they said. We miss King Log. He was a fine king. We made a bad trade. The frogs spoke to the gods. They said, we ask you, the gods, please send us back King Log. The gods were mad. Fools, they said. You said you must have a strong king. We sent you one. He is yours to keep. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed that tale as much as I did, because now I'm going to ask for your help to retell the story, and then we're going to fill in our story map. So go ahead and look at our table here. Now, what do we have here? Let me get these guys off, because we're going to fill in our story map. Remember, if you had your paper and pencil from earlier, here's where we're going to be using it in just a minute, because we're going to fill in our story map with that information. But before we do, let's just kind of retell the story to make sure we all remember exactly what's going on. Now, who are our characters in this story? You can remember? I hear people right now. Right. We had frogs. We definitely had the frogs. Now, even though it might not have been a big character, when the frogs asked for a king, what did the gods send first? That's right, a log, just like this piece of wood here. And they dropped it right there in front of them. And those frogs thought when it hit the ground that this was a big scary log, right? It made a big splash. But then after a little while, you can see what logs do. Do logs do anything? No, logs just sit there. So the frogs decided, hey, this isn't a scary, strong king after all. This log just sits there. This isn't what we asked for. So what did the frogs do then? They asked the gods. And the gods, they're another character. But I want you to notice that I don't have the gods right here. If you remember in the story, the gods weren't really at the pond, were they? They weren't out there doing these things. The gods were way up above, just kind of pulling the strings. So when we think about our characters of the gods, we can just kind of look up above, because in this story, that's where they were, right? And then we had one more character, a very important character that came in towards the end of the story when they asked for another god. And I'm trying to get him out here. We have King Crane, right? So this is my version of King Crane today. And I even looked it up. Cranes kind of make a rah, rah. So think about what happened. The gods, the frogs, who were probably fine anyway, they said, you know what, we're not happy. We need a god, we need a king. So the gods who were up above, they dropped that log there because they wanted to kind of trick them, right? Because the gods knew they didn't really need a king. But the frogs were not happy with this log because all it did was sat there. It was tame. It didn't do enough for them, so they asked the gods, gods, can we please, we need a strong king. So the gods, what did they do? Do you remember? What's the other character that they sent? That's right, they sent the crane. And what did we know about the crane, right? The crane didn't just sit there like the log. The crane was a lot bigger, and the crane was fast. But what did the crane do? It started eating the frogs, right? So the crane's down there, he's eating all the frogs, and the frogs run away. And then they looked back up and they said, you know what? We really want our log king back. But the gods said, no, you got what you asked for, right? And that's exactly what this story teaches us. Sometimes you want to be careful what you ask for and just be happy with what you have. So I hope you enjoyed our retelling. Thank you for helping me with that. So let's write this on our story map, because next time in our next writing lesson, you're actually going to use this story map to go to the next part, the drafting part of our writing process. So what we do today, you want to, if you write this down, you'll be able to use it again. But if not, that's okay. Just help me out by listening and telling me the answers. So the name of the tale is King Log and King Crane. Okay? And we know our characters, the who. We had the frogs. We had the gods. And we had the crane. Where? Well, this whole story took place in the pond where the frogs live. So it took place in a pond. So now we want to go back and think about it. We retold the story, but we want to break it down to just 3 main events: what happened at the beginning, middle, and the end. So if we think about it, once there were some frogs. And what did those frogs want? A king. So let's write that. Once there were frogs who wanted a king. So, next in the tale, the king. The frogs asked the gods for the king, right? And what did the gods send them? They sent them the log, because they were going to play a joke on them. And that is kind of funny. So next in the tale, the gods sent a log. But we know the frogs, after a while, they realized that he was tame, and they were like, this log king isn't going to cut it. We need a strong king. So at the end of the tale, the gods sent King Crane. There you go. So let's look back at what we've written in our story. Name of the tale, King Log and King Crane. We have our characters, frogs, gods, and the crane. Happened at the pond. And then once there were frogs who wanted a king. Next in the tale, the gods sent the log. At the end of the tale, the gods sent King Crane. All right? You guys have worked so hard today on our lesson about the writing process, and you did a great job helping me with my story map. I'm so proud of you. You should be proud too. All rights and credits for today's lesson come from Core Knowledge, and we'd like to thank them for publicly sharing these materials. So I can't wait to see you next time, boys and girls. See you then.